This program contains images of mummified remains that may disturb some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. A horrific discovery is retrieved from the bowels of a frozen peak in the Andes.
Why are these children buried so high up on a mountain? What on earth could they possibly be doing up here?
All the signs point to these children being selected and groomed for some very special purpose.
Debris from a passenger plane found buried in a glacier in the French Alps raises new suspicions.
If the crash had in fact been an act of sabotage, you have to ask, how did they do it? Was there a bomb on board?
What are classified documents doing amongst the debris of a passenger plane crash?
And strange towers of ice in the middle of a sub-zero desert.
It's really confusing. To make ice, you need water. So how did all this ice end up in a desert?
These are the strangest mysteries trapped in the coldest places. Lost relics. Forgotten treasures. Dark secrets. Locked in their icy tombs for ages. But now, as ice melts around the world, their stories will finally be exposed. High in the Argentinian Andes, amidst the icy peaks, archaeologists find a site that leads to a ghastly discovery.
When most people picture the Andes, they think of Peru or Machu Picchu. But there are also the snow-covered mountains of Argentina.
They tower over the Atacama Desert, one of the driest places on the planet.
This mountain is over 20,000 feet in elevation. And it's home to the highest archaeological site in the world.
Archaeologists braved several days of driving winds and freezing temperatures to reach the summit of Yoyoyako before they could begin excavations of 3 burials lying under 5 feet of rock and earth. One of the burial platforms had been placed in a naturally formed hole in bedrock so narrow that the archaeologists were forced to lower a man by hand into the pit to retrieve its contents, the body of a young girl.
It's a disturbing sight.
It appears as if these bodies are all children, 3 of them, which had been mummified by the cold.
Why are these children buried so high up on a mountain? What on earth could they possibly be doing up here?
It's an unsettling discovery, even for this group of seasoned archaeologists, and they're compelled to find out what happened to them. The tombs date back to the Inca Empire. The Incas were a sophisticated and powerful civilization that ruled over a large portion of South America from 1438 to 1533 AD. From what we know of Inca traditions, people were buried where they lived, not on top of a mountain.
This isn't a settlement, and there's no larger burial site up here. It's just these 3 bodies.
Due to the extremely cold, arid environment, their bodies froze before they dehydrated, so the organs never shriveled and desiccation never occurred. This resulted in making them the most Scientists begin analyzing the bodies and quickly determine their ages. The smaller children, a boy and a girl, are both around 4 or 5. The older girl is around 13, and they discover that she was likely suffering from tuberculosis.
Tuberculosis is highly contagious and deadly. Putting infected people high on a mountain would be an effective method of preventing the spread of disease. Maybe this was their way of stopping an epidemic.
But when scientists examined the remains of the two other children, they show no signs of the disease.
Maybe the other two were siblings of the sick child and quarantined as a precaution.
But it just doesn't make sense. There had to be other places to isolate sick people that weren't so hard to reach. This was a sophisticated civilization. Archaeologists analyze their clothing and conclude that these children were members of a high social class. When the Spanish invaded in 1532, they were known to capture important members of the Inca nobility and hold them ransom as a means to exert influence over the entire society. Could these children have been taken hostage?
The young boy was found tied up, which could be evidence of a kidnapping. And the high elevation would have allowed them to spot any rescue force coming from a distance.
Maybe these were hostages who were eliminated when nobles didn't cooperate, or when they weren't needed anymore.
But why would they go to all this trouble to bury disposable hostages on the top of the mountain? And that's not the biggest problem with this theory. Scientists perform radiocarbon testing on the mummies to determine their age.
Examinations of the remains suggest that the bodies are, at the very least, 500 years old.
The Spanish didn't arrive in the area until 1532. These mummies were buried decades before that. So these children probably weren't political hostages.
More research into the bodies offers yet another surprising discovery. Tests show that each of the children had high levels of alcohol and coca in their system at the time of death. In fact, the older girl had a chunk of it lodged in between her teeth and her cheek.
These intoxicants were used by Inca of all ages. The alcohol was a corn-based spirit known as chicha, and coca leaves were known to alleviate altitude sickness.
Could the alcohol and coca provide a clue to what led these children to die high up in the mountains? Three frozen mummies of Inca children are discovered on top of a mountain in the Andes. Their bodies reveal that they were given a large amount of alcohol and coca prior to their deaths.
Do these intoxicants give us any clues into the cause of the children's death?
By modern Western standards, it sounds disturbing, but the Incas viewed these things very differently.
To be drunk or in a state of intoxication was considered to be a spiritual or holy experience for the Incas. Coca was an integral part of their society. And it still remains an important part of Andean culture, even today.
Inca silver miners chewed coca leaf to help overcome pain, fatigue, and respiratory problems. But why give coca and alcohol to children?
Looking for answers. They analyzed the older girl's hair, with the understanding that hair grows 1 centimeter per month.
The girl's hair was braided so tight that it retained environmental evidence that gives us a timeline of the girl's health.
They deduced that her diet had changed dramatically about 12 months before her death.
Studies of the hair show that her diet changed from mostly potatoes to a much richer diet of meat and maize.
It would have been one of the most luxurious diets you could imagine at that time.
All the signs point to these children being selected and groomed for some very special purpose.
Could they have been selected for ritual sacrifice to the gods?
The Incas participated in human sacrifices. Child sacrifice was called capacocha.
It was a great honor to be sacrificed in this manner. The Inca chose children from the far corners of their lands to underscore the unity of their empire.
In fact, there was a caste of Inca groomed especially for this great honor. They were called Diakia, and the older girl fits the description.
An Akia was a young girl schooled in the art of weaving and chicha making.
When Akias reached puberty, they were either married off to a dignitary or offered up as a sacrifice to the gods. If she was chosen for sacrifice, she would be led through a series of rituals involving large quantities of alcohol and coca during a months-long journey from the Inca capital of Cuzco to her final resting place. Researchers still don't know how she died, but typical methods of ritual killing were strangulation, live burial, and blows to the head.
As barbaric as it sounds, we need to understand this in the context of Inca belief and tradition. This was one of the greatest honors bestowed on anyone, whether child or adult. Their sacrifice literally was to ensure the survival of their entire people.
While the oldest girl seems to fit into the story of this tradition, the younger two children do not. Until more conclusive evidence comes to light, experts continue to explore theories as to why they were also part of this sacrifice to the gods. Resting on the border between Italy and France, towering at an elevation of over 15,000 feet, lies the tallest mountain in the Alps, Mont Blanc.
You're way up in the Alps, in the most pristine wilderness. And then you look around and you see there's debris and carnage everywhere.
The debris is scattered all over the glacier. It covers the landscape, half buried in snow and ice. How did all this end up on the top of a mountain?
The debris field is scattered for miles along the glacier and includes mechanical parts, pieces of luggage, and fragments of human remains.
Given the size and the scale of the debris field, this looks like it came from a large aircraft, probably a commercial airliner. Based on this, it leads you to think of one plane crash in particular.
On the morning of January 24th, 1966, Air India Flight 101, a Boeing 707, was en route from Bombay to London, with stops in Delhi, Beirut, and Geneva. Before landing in Geneva, contact was lost with the plane. It suddenly and mysteriously went down over the Alps, killing all of the 106 passengers and 11 crew members. The flight recorder was never found.
The black box would have revealed some evidence of what happened to the plane, but without it, there's been a lot of controversy surrounding the tragedy.
As the mountaineers scour the glacier inspecting the debris, they make an intriguing discovery.
At first glance, it appears to be a plain canvas bag poking out of the snow.
But this is no ordinary bag. Inside, they found newspapers, calendars, and a letter from the Ministry of External Affairs to India, labeled Top Secret.
What are classified documents doing amongst the debris of a passenger plane crash?
On board the plane was India's top nuclear scientist, Homi J. Bhabha. He was the head of the country's Atomic Energy Commission and commonly known as the father of Indian nuclear power.
Bhabha was on his way to Vienna to attend meetings at the International Atomic Energy Agency.
Just 4 years earlier, India had been at war with China over disputed territory in the Himalayas. And there was also simmering tensions with Pakistan due to the recent Indo-Pakistani War of 1965.
As a result of all these political tensions, India was looking to grow its military strength and develop a competitive nuclear weapons program. And Homi Bhabha was the man who was going to make it happen.
India had also been strengthening its ties to the Soviet Union in hopes of purchasing military equipment. It was poised to become the world's next nuclear power.
Could the crash have been an attempt to stop India from producing an atomic bomb?
If Homi Bhabha was suddenly killed, it would definitely inhibit India's aspiration of becoming a nuclear-armed nation.
If the crash had in fact been an act of sabotage, you have to ask, how did they do it? Was there a bomb on board? Some other kind of explosion?
But if the plane was destroyed by a bomb, the debris field would be much larger.
For example, if you take a look at the Lockerbie bombing in 1988, the wreckage was spread over 845 square miles.
In the case of Lockerbie, large parts of the plane were found strewn across the debris field. In fact, the side of the entire front end of the plane was found intact. But on Mont Blanc, the debris found is much smaller in size and more mixed. Researchers then make an unexpected discovery that raises even more questions about what happened to the plane.
Not only did they find wreckage from the Air India flight, but in the debris they also discovered a radio console from an Italian fighter jet.
It appeared to be from a Lockheed Martin F-104G fighter jet belonging to the Italian Air Force.
It was entirely unexpected. Everyone had been assuming they were looking at parts from one plane, not two.
So what's a radio console from an Italian fighter jet doing at the crash site of another plane? Was it just a coincidence, or was there something more going on?
It all just makes you think that something suspicious is going on here.
In January 1966, Air India Flight 101 crashed near the peak of Europe's tallest mountain, Mont Blanc. After finding a radio console from an Italian fighter jet amongst the wreckage, some are questioning exactly what happened that day.
One theory is that the Italians were spying on the French, and that the Italian fighter jet collided with the Air India flight on one of these clandestine missions.
According to the crash report issued by the French government, eyewitnesses report having seen huge clouds of smoke above Mont Blanc.
But there's just one problem with this.
If there had been a mid-air collision, you'd expect to see a lot more debris from the Italian fighter jet, not just the radio console. But we don't.
While the conspiracy theories are certainly intriguing, the might be much simpler.
As part of the inquiry, investigators poured through the air traffic communication logs to try to figure out what happened.
Before takeoff, one of the plane's navigational instruments wasn't working. So the pilot had to stay in constant contact with the control tower to keep track of his position.
The weather conditions that day were whiteout. So the communication between air traffic control and the pilot was even more important.
In those crucial final minutes of the flight, it sounds like there was a critical misunderstanding between the air traffic controller and the pilot. Over the radio, the pilot said that he was passing a beam Mont Blanc, meaning alongside the mountain. But this was not the case. He was actually heading directly for it.
It seems the air traffic controller missed or misunderstood the word a beam and replied to the pilot, "You have 5 miles to the Mont Blanc," by which he meant Mont Blanc is 5 miles directly in front of you.
The controller, thinking the pilot understood that he needed to change course, did not alert him.
There's no way of knowing for sure what happened to the plane, but it appears that the Air India flight crashed due to faulty equipment and a misunderstanding between the pilot and air traffic control.
It's still strange that the debris from the Italian fighter jet was found. Maybe there are still some unanswered questions there.
Unless more evidence reveals itself within the melting glacier, the mysterious fighter jet debris found on Mont Blanc will likely continue to stoke the embers of conspiracy and speculation for years to come. In the Ladakh region, a cold desert stretches for miles between the Himalayas and neighboring Kunlun mountain range.
Hardly any rain falls in this desert. The Himalayas are the highest mountain range in the world and block almost all of the monsoon rains that come in from India. It leaves a very high arid plateau behind. It's one of the driest regions of the world.
It sits at such a high altitude that it's still freezing cold all year long. These extreme temperatures and lack of water means that there's very little plant life. It's a frozen desert.
Hikers trekking through the lowland between the mountains come across a strange spectacle. Giant spires that appear to be made of ice.
I've never seen anything like this before. It's highly unusual to see these vertical structures of ice in the middle of a desert.
It's really confusing. To make ice, you need water. So how did all this ice end up in a desert?
From America's Wild West to the Great Barrier Reef, mystifying ruins lay buried beneath the waves.
These ships were maintaining a whole empire.
Using the latest technology, we strip back the present and reconstruct the past.
Many people compare it to something out of a James Bond movie.
The real story is much more interesting.
Drain the Oceans. Tonight at 9, new to National Geographic.
The impact of human ingenuity is everywhere. From the seemingly mundane,
Most elegant, wonderful invention. We all need one immediately.
to the spectacular.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We reveal the stories behind the everyday creations that have transformed the way we live.
It's the future.
Great Inventions, Wednesday nights at 9, new to National Geographic.
This new year on National Geographic Network. Join Hollywood icon Rob Lowe as he counts down the 10 most defining moments in the 80s pop culture.
We all love the 80s, right? It's the decade we just can't quit.
Innovation comes at a costly price.
A lot of people out there have been thinking, not if it's going to happen, but when it's going to happen.
Delve into history's most catastrophic engineering calamities and the lessons we can learn to propel future invention.
Hi, passport ID?
It's all hands on deck at Spain's busiest airport as a team of security work 24/7 to protect their borders. Explore the weird side of nature with the strangest, creepiest, and deadliest creatures of the wild. All new this new year on National Geographic Network.
Tales tell of powerful, solitary pharaohs chosen of the gods by divine birth. Whispers can turn myth into legend, but look for the truth and the writings on the wall. Experts use the latest technology to bring facts to light.
She was the power behind the throne.
And secrets out of the dark.
Oh my God.
Lost Treasures of Egypt, Thursday nights at 9, new to National Geographic.
In the middle of a cold, dry desert, strange towers of ice jut out of the otherwise barren landscape. How did they come to be? Examples of vertical ice formations have been recorded elsewhere on the planet. In Antarctica and the Arctic, small towers of ice can be found. It's a phenomenon called sastrugi.
Sastrugi form when wind blows the snow into these hard-packed ridges over the surface and form much like sand dunes do in a desert.
When the wind picks up, it erodes the softer snow around the solid ridges, creating these peaks.
Could these ice spires be a type of sastrugi?
When sastrugis form, they get to be at most a few feet high, and they shift around in the wind. You need vast fields of snow in order to form them. These enormous towers, isolated by themselves with no snow on the landscape, couldn't have possibly been sastrugi.
Scientists believe they have seen something like this before, just not on our planet. In 2015, NASA scientists found evidence of unusual ice formations on Pluto, resembling giant knife blades. Could these formations on the other side of the solar system provide answers to the ice formations in Ladakh?
The spires we see on Pluto are up to 1,600 feet tall, 2 to 3 miles apart. So although they're a lot bigger than what we see, they are of similar shape.
In order to understand whether the formations on Pluto offer any explanations for the ice towers in Ladakh, we need to understand how the spires on Pluto were formed. NASA scientists used weather prediction techniques to analyze how the formations on Pluto came to be.
These formations on Pluto were formed by sublimation. It's when the sunlight vaporizes the ice, and then it recondenses to slowly form these giant towers.
Sublimation is the process of turning a solid substance to gas without liquefying it first. In the case of Pluto, the vapors then immediately refreeze, creating 1,600 feet tall towers of ice. Could the same process that formed the giant spires on Pluto have created these giant ice spires? It's plausible, if it weren't for one glaring issue.
You would need vast amounts of snow in order to sublimate enough water to form ice towers of this size. There's no snow around, so these towers couldn't have been formed by sublimation.
Based on the size of the formations, the climate, and geography, there doesn't appear to be any explanation for how these structures could have been made naturally. Which begs the question, could they have been man-made?
Some of the ice towers are adorned with prayer flags, which could lead one to believe that they're for religious or spiritual purposes.
They're shaped of Buddhist temples found in the area, called stupas. A stone stupa is a domed structure, used as a place of meditation. Often they'll be topped with a tall steeple and a private interior chamber to house religious relics or even act as a burial chamber. The Ladakh region is home to a large number of Tibetan Buddhists, and there are the remains of about 4,000 or 5,000 stone stupas in the area. But the aerial and satellite imaging of the area appears to contradict this theory.
Satellite images show us that these structures melt in the summer, and most of them by the end of the summer have completely disappeared.
Why would you build a temple that only lasts for half of the year? When the structures do melt in the summer, the key to their mystery reveals itself.
As the ice towers melt, a system of pipes is revealed that runs right through the middle of the structure.
The pipes appear to be able to pump water from higher up in the mountains to the center of the frozen spires.
This confirms they are man-made.
But why would someone create a giant ice tower in the middle of a freezing desert?
In the freezing, arid desert between the Himalayan and Kunlun mountains stand dozens of bizarre icy spires with pipes running through the center of them. Who built them and why? The answer may be linked to the village farmers whose crops can't grow in a barren desert.
Once the meltwater from the winter has run out, there is little drinking water left for the villagers or water for the crops in the valley.
Sonam Wangchuk, a local engineer, attempted to address the water shortages that threatened the villagers' way of life. He came up with the ice stupas as a way of storing millions of gallons of water for various communities that would last into the spring.
Ice stupas are created in the winter using runoff spring water that's been piped underground and downslope. When the temperatures drop below zero, the water is sprayed up into the air where it freezes. Over the season, elaborate conical structures take shape, reaching up to the height of a 10-story building. They start melting in March and can last all the way through July.
In the summers, these towers melt away and form rivers that actually feed and sustain the local towns, that irrigate the crops and sustain life up in the high desert.
The ice stupas aren't temples, but rather an imaginative way of overcoming irrigation problems. They're human ingenuity at its finest. In western Alaska on the Bering Sea lies the small coastal town of Quinhag.
It's a small community with a population of about 700 people. And the only way to get in there is to fly in.
It's completely surrounded by miles and miles of sea and frozen tundra. This place really is the end of the Earth.
In early spring 2007, the town was experiencing unusually warm weather. As a result, the permafrost was turning into swampland.
Local teens were out enjoying the weather and quad biking on the beach when they came across a strange wooden object in the sand.
When you first see it, it's hard to tell what it is.
The village elders knew what it was.
It appeared to be an ancient ceremonial mask associated with the Yupik people.
The Yupik have lived in this area for hundreds of years, and still do. Fearing that the artifacts from their ancestors could be in danger of being lost forever, the Yupik elders invited archaeologists from the University of Aberdeen to investigate the area.
When the team began to explore the valuable artifacts, hundreds of wooden masks, bowls, dolls, and figurines, as well as ivory and wood carvings, all buried deep in the permafrost.
It's not just a collection of artifacts, it's an entire village that's been frozen in time for hundreds of years, dating back to the 15th century.
But at the site, something seemed off.
As the archaeologists excavated further, they made a gruesome discovery. Melting out of the permafrost, they find the skull of a young woman. As archaeologists uncover the rest of the body, they find that she is located just outside of what used to be a sod house, with multiple rooms branching off in every direction.
Usually human remains are buried in one specific area of a village. But what we have here really doesn't make sense. They're right outside a house.
And it's not just one body. More remains are found. One after another after another. 28 people in total emerged from the icy ground in the immediate vicinity of the house.
In this part of the world, you would not expect to find human bones associated with a residential structure.
There's something really off here. Finding a body position like this and not in a tomb or in a gravesite is quite strange.
These bodies weren't buried. They appear to have just fallen and been left on the ground outside their homes.
These bodies are found lying down, some with their faces in the mud, others with hands outstretched. There's a clear suggestion of extreme distress.
It soon becomes clear that these are the victims of some sort of cataclysmic event. What could have caused the annihilation of this entire Yupik village?
28 people is a lot to die all at once. Something truly terrible must have happened here.
Scientists take a closer look at the bones. Bone structure analysis identifies most as women, children, and old men. Only one was a male of fighting age. Could it have been a natural disaster?
Historical remains from ancient settlements around the world show it's possible for a catastrophic event to bring life in an entire city to an abrupt end.
The most famous example of this is Pompeii. Pompeii was a large Roman town that was entirely destroyed in 79 CE when the nearby volcano, Mount Vesuvius, erupted.
The Vesuvius eruption covered the town in at least 19 feet of volcanic ash and debris.
The intense heat of the eruption killed people right where they stood, preserving their last moments wherever they were in town, whatever they were doing.
In many ways, the site of Quinhagh is very similar to Pompeii. Everything is just left where it was.
It's clear Quinhagh wasn't subject to a volcanic eruption. But could some other natural disaster have brought life in the village to an equally abrupt end?
The village is on the coast, so is it possible that a flood or some other tidal event could have killed these people?
In 1964, an earthquake known as the Great Alaskan Earthquake rocked south-central Alaska. The ground split open, buildings collapsed, and a massive tsunami swelled and crashed onto the shoreline, killing 131 people all told. Could the same thing have happened hundreds of years earlier, here in Quinhagh?
Coming up next. This is the future. Nat Geo Science, next on National Geographic.
Behind every ocean wreck is a disaster.
It's the most challenging shipwreck I ever worked with.
Using the latest technology, investigates the disasters of the past. Dive into danger and mystery. Ocean Wreck Investigation, Wednesday nights at 11. New to National Geographic.
It's Wild Time on Prime Time. With brand new premieres every night. Wow. That's right. All new shows every single night. I know. From fresh premieres to returning fan favorite series.
It's new every day.
We're doing right by Wild. The animals may be untamed, but your nights shouldn't be unplanned. So be sure to put us on your watch list.
That's clear, thank you.
When exposed to the elements, the line between fortune and failure is razor thin.
I'm just feeling defeated.
But with man's best friend by their side, we'll find out who's really wild by nature. Called to the Wild, Thursday nights at 10, new to National Geographic.
We're not backing down.
The impact of human ingenuity is everywhere. From the seemingly mundane,
The most elegant, wonderful invention. We all need one immediately.
to the spectacular,
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
we reveal the stories behind the everyday creations that have transformed the way we live.
It's the future.
Great Inventions, Wednesday nights at 9, new to National Geographic.
In Quinhag, southwestern Alaska, archaeologists uncover the remains of 28 members of the ancient Yupik people, preserved in the permafrost since around 1650 CE. Could they have been wiped out en masse by a massive flood, or even a tsunami?
If it was a flood, you wouldn't expect to find any biological specimens intact. Any wooden artifacts would have rotted in the water.
In addition, the sedimentary layers of the archaeological site would have been destroyed.
The force of the tide would have moved things, but that's not the case here. What we're seeing is that everything was just left as it was, totally frozen in time.
If it wasn't an earthquake, could it have been a sudden and deadly plague that wiped out this community?
In the ancient city of Thebes in Egypt, there was a horrific plague around 250 AD. Archaeologists have found bonfires containing human remains and pits where bodies were covered with lime in an attempt to stop the spread of the disease.
If it were an epidemic, we would expect to see the remains at a safe distance from the village, not left right outside their houses.
You'd also expect to see adult males among the dead. However, the majority of the remains found at the site belong to women, children, and the elderly.
The answer to what deadly events happened here may lie within the buildings themselves. Archaeologists find a layer of ash in the site.
The ash is in a thick layer across all of the walls, which indicates that the main building completely burnt down.
They even discovered the charred remains of a dog inside a building.
Examining the roof more closely, it turned out that it was just studded with arrowheads. So many, in fact, that it looked like a pincushion.
As they dig further, they find grass ropes.
A lot of these bodies were burned and partially dismembered. Some of them even tied up with the same grass rope and executed.
Out of respect for the dead and their descendants, the archaeologists chose not to release any images of the human remains.
There are arrows everywhere. Something truly tragic happened here.
All signs point to a nightmare scenario. The ancestors of this village were clearly the victims of a terrible massacre. What could have led to this tragedy?
Local elders tell of an ancient story that might hold the
Yupik legends describe a conflict that was started during a game of darts.
It all began when one boy accidentally hit another boy in the eye with a dart.
The father of the injured boy was so furious, he knocked out both eyes of the boy who caused the injury.
Then a relative of that boy retaliated, and the conflict escalated.
Legend has it, the people of Quinhag put together a war party and set out to attack the other village, but it didn't go as planned.
The people of the other village had prior warning of the attack and ambushed the fighters, killing all of their warriors.
After the ambush, the warriors from the other village descended on Quinault, killed the women and children, and burned it to the ground.
The Dart game eventually caused a series of wars across Alaska and the Yukon.
It was known as the Bow and Arrow Wars, and stories of this period have been passed down in Yupik oral tradition for generations. Some, however, have another theory of why the wars may have started.
They believed it was the result of scarce resources after a cold weather pattern known as the Little Ice Age hit the region.
The Little Ice Age is believed to have taken place between 1400 through to the mid-19th century.
The Ice Age catastrophically changed the environment. Many plant species were made extinct and animal migration patterns changed. Local populations had to compete over what few resources were left.
Regular food sources would have been scarce, and their normal hunting areas may not have yielded enough meat. This could have motivated the Yupik to wage a vicious war on their neighbors for their own survival.
It's a tragic discovery, but one that gives us insight into what happens when environmental conditions force human survival to the brink.
Every Monday to Friday at 11 p.m., can the investigators uncover the truth of what really happened?
He's hiding something from us. This is some conspiracy? Steer! They didn't stand a chance.
Who was behind it? How did they do it? What were they thinking? There's always more to the story. Nat Geo Investigates, Monday to Friday nights at 11 on National Geographic. Coming up next.
This is the future.
Nat Geo Science, next on National Geographic.
This is the North Carolina Zoo. You go through the whole circle of life here at this zoo. We experience births.
Ooh, look at this little hair.
We experience deaths.
Having to let go and say goodbye is very difficult.
The best part of the job is when you see the smiles on the children's faces.
I'm actually paid money to do that.
Secrets of the Zoo, North Carolina, Thursday nights at 8:30. New to National Geographic Wild.
The idea of global transportation of food was still a fantasy 200 years ago. We just needed a reliable solution for keeping it fresh. The answer lay in the freezing North American winters. It was to kickstart a whole new food industry and change the way people ate: ice harvesting. Back in the 1800s, the Iceman would drive in on a horse-drawn ice wagon. Using ice hooks, he would unload a nice square chunk of ice, haul it into a person's home, and lift it into the icebox. There were two problems with using plain ice. One was the health risks from ice created from polluted water. The second was that natural ice production was seasonal. We needed a safe, artificial way of freezing. Dr. John Gorey invented a groundbreaking machine with a simple system capable of creating ice. His machine was not intended to keep food fresh. Instead, his invention was designed to cool down his patients who were suffering with the deadly virus, yellow fever. He had become convinced that keeping them cool would help to cure them. Gorey devised a contraption that injected cool air around his feverish patients. His invention took us another big step closer to the development of the domestic fridge and the concept of air conditioning. Everything was changing rapidly. Household appliances were being invented to make life easier. And the first mass-market electric refrigerator arrived. It had a thermostat and the first ice cube tray. It not only changed the way we store food, it helped modernize and transform society.
This new year on National Geographic Network. Join Hollywood icon Rob Lowe as he counts down the 10 most defining moments in the 80s pop culture.
We all love the 80s, right? It's the decade we just can't quit.
Humans' constant urge for innovation comes at a costly price.
A lot of people out there have been thinking, not if it's going to happen, but when it's going to happen.
Delve into history's most catastrophic engineering calamities and the lessons we can learn to propel future invention.
Hi, passport ID?
It's all hands on deck at Spain's busiest airport as a team of security work 24/7 to protect their borders.